To be truly successful, an object needs just enough material to serve its purpose. In the case of a car, and particularly a sports car, removing material not only makes it lighter and therefore faster, but can also save on cost. A light yet robust structure was done to great effect in the 1880s by Gustave Eiffel. It was Colin Chapman's watchword, and Renault strove to do the same on four wheels with the Renault Sport Spyder. When a car with a shorter wheelbase and less weight than a VW Up is married with a 148 horsepower engine from the Clio Williams, you know it's going to be fun. No wonder then that Road and Track describe it as a croissant designed for hand-to-hand combat. Just why did Renault, a company who was focused on trying to reclaim a decent share of the family car market, make a limited run out-and-out sports car? Join me and its father, Renault's head of design, Patrick Lequemont, who has a new book out that I'd highly recommend, link in the description, for the Renault Sport Spyder story. Raymond Levy wanted to shake up Renault's design department, so he hired an ex-Ford and Volkswagen man, Patrick Lequemont, fulfilling a desire Patrick had to run the design department of his favourite auto manufacturer. It was time to dream big. It was decided the styling design department needed to make a quick, bold statement of intent, and the best way to do this was a concept car, or two in this case.
So that was one of the very first things that we began. I proposed two concept cars. One was, let's say, oriented towards, let's say, intelligence. That's a bit, maybe, I don't want to overdo that, but the notion of the scenic concept car, which was a very interesting car and innovative. And the other one was really harking back to the days of Alpine and doing a very lightweight car. And also, I must say that I did have in the back of my mind doing all I could to get Alpine back on the road.
Where the Scenic would be a practical mini MPV, showing what tricks Renault had learnt from their work with Matra creating the Espace. The lightweight sports car would rekindle the French car company's sporting flame. Renault were about to get back into Formula One racing, so showing off Renault's sporty side wouldn't hurt, and a sports car would give a little pizzazz to the Renault name that in the 80s had been known for bland, boxy family cars. As Patrick said, there were hopes by some that this car would be the start of something new for Alpine. Alpine had started in the 1950s as a manufacturer of sports and racing cars, and they had used many Renault parts, including pretty much the entire car in the early days. Given their close ties with Renault, it's maybe natural Renault would purchase them in 1973, but by the introduction of the A610 in 1991, it was clear they'd moved away from their lightweight roots, and lackluster sales weren't helping. The new Renault Alpine sports car concept would be known as the Laguna. No, not that Laguna. The name would be recycled for Renault's family car in 1994. The Laguna concept would be much more exotic. It would be light with an aluminium chassis. When married with a mid-mounted 2-litre engine, Renault said it could get to 60 in 6 seconds and onwards to 155 miles an hour. It was styled by up-and-coming stylist Jean-Pierre Plouet, designer of the Twingo and future head of design at the Fiat Chrysler Peugeot Opel conglomerate Stellantis. Where Mazda would launch the MX-5 Roadster around the same time that harkened back to classic British sports cars, the Laguna would look forward to a Blade Runner-style sci-fi future. The windscreen was gone, with just a pod for the rear view mirror, and I'm sure if this car had been designed today, that would have been replaced by a screen on the dashboard to further clean up the lines. Instead of the driving goggles of old, occupants wore special visors that included headphones and microphones so they could talk to each other. The problem with open tops is their propensity to get wet when left unattended, and when not getting wet, people were stealing stuff you'd left in the passenger seat. Renault solved this by integrating clamshell elements to the front and back, so when you left your car you could quickly slide the cover together to protect it from the rain or sticky fingers. Inside, it was stylish simplicity itself, with seats covered in fabric inspired by the David Hockney painting A Bigger Splash. This was art fusing with automotive design, a bold leap away from the Renault 9's three-box blandness. Butterfly, or beetle doors as Renault called them, allowed for easy entry to the car. Even the hubcaps made their own design statement. The Laguna was shown at the 1990 Paris Motor Show, where it caused quite a stir.
And we showed it, and it was a bit of a surprise to most. In those days, of course, there were so few concept cars being shown at motor shows. So when we arrived, there was a bit of excitement. It was extremely well liked. It was on the news in various countries and so on. So yes, we were quite pleased with the result.
So far, so good. The Laguna would start to redefine Renault, as would the Scenic concept a year later. But what about Patrick's goal of turning the Laguna into a road-going Alpine? This is where desire met hard reality. Renault couldn't do everything. They were busy remaking Renault's image and didn't have the resources to fund a new Alpine. The Laguna was put on the back burner, but another Jean-Pierre Plouet design would come to influence what would become the Renault Sport Spider.
To tell the truth, how it all began was I used to wander into the studios very early in the morning before anybody got there. And I would look, in those days, the sketches were up on the wall. And I was looking at all those sketches. And there, just in the corner, there was this tiny little sketch. And it was what the Argos was to become. And I immediately said, well, this is exactly what we're looking for. When I told the designer that I really appreciate that car, he said, oh, that cockroach. So clearly he didn't see it with the same eyes, despite the fact he was the fella responsible.
The shape of the car that would become the Argos could have been drawn by a child, but it was clearly influenced by the Bauhaus design movement of the 1920s and 30s, with little styling touches all over the vehicle, and it would have a unique third lounge seat behind the driver. Again, it would be a lightweight design, this time with a minimalist foldable windscreen.
Now, being a Frenchman working for a French company, even though I had an international team, I couldn't exactly, say, well, we're going to do a German-inspired sports car. So I knew, of course, of a French movement, the equivalent at the time, which was called the New Spirit, l'Esprit Nouveau.
The Argos appeared at the 1994 Geneva Motor Show to a rapturous reception. Only the Twingo had seen so many people visit Renault's booth, but this time there seemed to be a lot of German voices inspecting the car closely. And rumour has it the Argos had a strong influence on the upcoming Bauhaus-inspired Audi TT.
And I would say that there was everyone from Audi was there, and lots of people from other German companies. It so happened, I found out later, that Audi was very much going in that direction, thinking of having a Bauhaus-inspired movement. So they loved the car.
The Argos showed the way Renault's design team was thinking, but the idea of a lightweight car to save Alpine hadn't gone away. Patrick Lequemont would turn to a friend in motorsports to turn these dreams into reality.
Well, in fact, we began to work on the car in 1993, and it was based really upon an exchange that I had with my dear pal. He still is very much of a dear pal, a name called Christian Konzen, who at the time was in charge of Renault Sport. And then, he led after that the Formula One effort. And we were a mischievous bunch, really. And I wouldn't say we plotted, but almost, I would say. Yes, I guess I should admit to the fact that we plotted this project.
Christian came from a world of vehicles stripped back to their bare elements, the lighter the better to win races. Project W94 would be a road-going sports car, and by being stripped back, it would be simpler to design, simpler to manufacture, and faster to get to market, purely because there was less to design and build. This would lower the cost of development, music to the ears of Renault's bean counters. So the design team was charged with creating a prototype that could be shown. Prototypes tended to be wider than the final car, as that made them look more exciting. Not Project W94 though. It would be exciting enough as it was, and by keeping an eye firmly on a production vehicle, they would be able to skip many steps between the prototype and the final product. Again, this was reducing the time to market, something Patrick Lequemon had learned from Japanese companies during his time working at Ford. He would be charged with pushing this at Renault, and he proudly points out that he helped reduce the development time for all cars by a third. If you can develop a car faster, you can beat the competition to market. And if you're smart, you can do it for less money. And if W94's development costs were lower, there was more chance it would get the green light. The shape was inspired by Alpines of old, particularly the A220 Cevennes, but the W94 concept would be its own shape, something new and fresh. The shape would be penned by one of Renault's young pool of talented designers, in this case Benoit Jacob, who would go on to head BMW's series of iCars and would oversee the design of the i3 and i8.
And basically, we thought of designing a up-to-date light sports car. Yes, it would be inspired by the Laguna in being extremely simple. Yes, it would have these beetle doors. And yes, it would not have a windshield at first. That's what we thought, instead of which that we were going to put a wind deflector. So we continued doing this design development, and we wanted it to be an Alpine, to also, do both things, come out with a sports car, but also, fight for the rebirth of Alpine.
The Laguna's beetle doors also made sure some product planner wouldn't be tempted to put a roof on the car. This meant it wouldn't need a heater, which further simplified the design. From the start, it was decided the car would have a strong two-tone look with lines that came from the sides towards the headlamps. Like the Twingo, this was a bold, colourful, and most importantly, whimsical new design statement to wipe away the seriousness of Renault designs from the 1980s. Underneath the plastic panelled exterior would be a lightweight aluminium chassis, showing the influence of Renault sport director Christian Conzon. Christian was racing Clios and had a lot of experience with the engine it used. It should come as no surprise then that the W94 concept should have the 2-litre 16-valve 4-cylinder 148 horsepower engine from the Clio Williams, launched around the same time the W94 project was being planned. Coupled with a 5-speed manual and positioned behind the driver, it would make the lightweight car a lot of fun. The team worked quickly. By May 1994, they had their first production prototype ready. They were soon testing it around the Nogaro track in southwest France. Both Patrick and Christian pitched their new creation to Renault's president. It would have a limited run. It could use Alpine's factory in Dieppe, where they already did low runs of sports cars. It would use an existing engine and gearbox. Like a Lotus, it would be simple inside, so no need for a lot of funds to develop it. And it should be an Alpine. They knew in their heart of hearts there was no chance of this car becoming an Alpine, but in every negotiation you have to give up something, don't you?
And both Christian Conzon and myself, we presented the project, and he was a bit startled by what we were doing. We were not terribly clear as to whether we were designing a concept car or we thought of doing a production car. We would show the project, and he started again feel at ease, and we pointed out to him that the car was not a very high investment, and eventually he thought it was quite a nice idea. So that was presented to the senior management, who said, no way are we going to produce an Alpine, but okay, let's call it a Renault Sport and let's go with it.
Renault had by this time made a triumphant return to Formula One as an engine supplier, finishing second in the Constructors' Championship in their first year and going on to take 6 consecutive World Championships as a constructor before retiring on top in 1997. It made more sense to push the Renault brand, and in particular its sporting roots. Rather than Alpine, the car would wear the Renault Sport badge. And why not have a racing series where these cars could race against each other? It could be a support series for other championships and help promote the Renault name at the same time. So work began to turn W94 into a production vehicle. There would be no power steering or ABS, this was a raw sports car. Brakes would be snagged from the Alpine A610 to save the cost of developing new ones. Although there wasn't a windscreen, the team charged with making the chassis made sure one could be added in the future. The influence from Renault Sport was clear with simple, basic construction. The gearbox and engine were mounted on an oscillating hinge which almost completely removed the engine vibration from the rest of the car, and thanks to the channel Solo Lap for capturing this amazing footage of it in action. The seats could be adjusted, but so could the pedals for that perfect driving position. The team obsessed with the weight, even the jack was made from aluminium. Inside the cockpit, low sides and no windscreen gave you the feeling of being at one with the road. The team initially went for speedometer and rev counter up ahead, with fuel, oil and temperature gauges in the middle, but by the final production car they'd shifted to rev counter, oil and temperature through the steering wheel, and the speed and ancillary information in an electronic cluster in the centre of the dashboard, like on the Renault Twingo. In fact, with the design team wanting to reuse parts as much as possible, I'd wager good money that it actually used the Twingo's electronic speedometer. Any other instrument lights and the hazard warning button were on the centre console. In keeping with the element of fun styling, the gear knob was a simple aluminium ball. The Renault Sport Spider broke cover at the 1995 Geneva Motor Show. To show just how fast development had been, it had been thought up in 1993, approved in 1994, and just 3 months before it was shown to the public, the full-scale clay mock-up had just been finalised. And although there was some last-minute negotiations from Christian and Patrick about giving it an Alpine badge, the car would wear the Renault diamond and the cast was set.
And so we showed it at the Geneva Motor Show in 1995, and it was very well accepted, or very much liked. And I recall this really funny event that I used to always accompany the president in the alleys to go and visit all the other manufacturers, all the show things that were going on. And just as I was walking in the alleys, there was this journalist who knew the president quite well, and he said, just by the way, in which category of investment has this baby come from? And the president, he looked at me with a smile on his face. He said, that is in fact from Patrick Leclément's slush fund, which was so funny, but in fact so very true, of course,
The Spider would share the stage with another concept, the Espace F1, a fevered dream from Espace producer Matra. It would be powered by the Renault engine from Alain Prost's 1993 Formula One car, getting the car to 60 miles an hour in under 3 seconds. And with the engine mounted between the rear seats, Patrick would enjoy a fast and very loud lap being driven by the 4-time Formula One world champion. The Espace F1 and Renault Sport Spider was a double whammy, underlining that Renault's engineering could mix it with the best in motorsport, so by extension their mass-produced cars should be something special. The reception at Geneva must have come as a huge relief to the team developing it, as the Spider was close to production ready. The car weighed just 790 kilograms, the same weight as the tiny Twingo, but the team's enthusiasm to trim weight had been a little too excessive.
We did have one huge hurdle, which was the weight issue, because we wanted that car to be very light. But at the time, Renault was really pushing very hard on Euro NCAP, the safety issues, and we wanted to be right at the top, which reached quite quickly. And of course, that car was not exactly in line with the message that the company wanted to share. And so we put on quite a few pounds as a result. And we were kind of sad about that, of course.
Just a few months after the Geneva show, at the end of 1995, production began, and in early 1996 the Renault Sport Spider went on sale for around £25,000. Like the Twingo, the Spider came in a limited but vibrant palette, red, blue and of course the distinctive Renault yellow. Outside it looked polished with big side scoops to cool the engine, but inside there were exposed wells that told you the Spider was also comfortable as a track car. It was the first time the Renault Sport logo had been used on a production car. Alpine was working on an update to the A610, the A710, but work on that was cancelled and A610 production stopped as well. With that, the Alpine name was quietly retired. Renault's future was Renault Sport. All cars were hand-built at Alpine's factory in Dieppe at the rate of 4 a day, and thankfully it meant Alpine workers could keep their jobs. With a 0 to 60 time under 7 seconds, this was the perfect halo car for Renault. Minimal development and production costs, but it was a car that reminded people why Renault was cleaning up in Formula One. The public wowed at this stylish creation without a windscreen. The wind deflector created a wall of air that created a pleasant cockpit most of the time, but larger insects could still hit you. Not the best thing to happen on a romantic drive in the countryside. Tall people had it worse, with their head getting constantly buffeted outside the wall of air. Renault didn't sell those crazy visors seen on the Laguna, but some people would have to revert back to using old-time racing goggles, especially when testing out the top speed of 130 miles an hour. There was an optional cover for when it rained, but it was pretty ineffective for anything over 20 miles an hour, meaning it was only useful as a rain cover when the car was parked. The British were also making a sports car splash, with Lotus releasing the Elise and Rover launching the MG-F at the same show. But rather than worrying Renault, this only confirmed that they'd made a car the public wanted. The road-going car might have had a 5-speed gearbox, but the racetrack version had a 6-speed. Renault had always intended to set up a dedicated race series for the Spider, and so produced 80 special trophy racing versions. At 850 kilos, it was 60 kilos lighter than the road-going version, even after a roll cage and fire extinguisher had been added. The tuned 180 horsepower engine could get to 156 miles an hour. Having no windscreen, it was easy for spectators to see the driver, and so make it an ideal support series. It would support Formula One and the BTCC, or British Touring Car Championship races, and future 2-time BTCC winner and fifth gear host Jason Plato and World Touring Car Championship winner Andy Priaulx would get their break winning Renault Sport Spider Championships. By removing those Beetle doors, RJ Racing was able to put a roof on the Spider, and with the help of the PRV V6 engine found in cars such as the Citroën XM, DeLorean and Alpine A610, it was entered into the British GT Championship as the Spider Le Mans. The V6 dictated a longer wheelbase which gave it more stability, and the 550 horsepower engine made this lightweight car a potent package. There were hopes to take it to Le Mans, but it failed to qualify. A road-going version called the Hellam V6 was made, but very few were ever made. Renault's design team used the Spider chassis to create another concept, the Renault 50 that they showed at the 1996 Geneva Motor Show, just a year after the Spider launch. The name 50 was a nod to the 50th anniversary of the launch of the 4CV. The idea came from head of Renault PR, Alain Dubois-Dumay, but Patrick Lequemont was never a fan of the project as he wasn't a fan of retro designs, preferring to look forward. Unlike Volkswagen's Beetle design, this was never destined for production. Although there was public demand for a windscreen on the Spider, Renault pushed back on introducing one.
For a while we resisted and came out with a wind deflector because we wanted the articles, in the press articles, to be really picking up on these incredible kind of a feature. It was a bit Mad Hatter kind of project, but I love that. Yeah.
A windscreen with a single wiper came in 1997 along with the UK launch. The windscreen would get a defogging heater, so although the driver and passenger would freeze on cold British days, the windscreen would stay nice and toasty. It also got some additional exterior colours. Despite the low volume, the car was clearly helpful in helping to sell Renault's other models. Production ended in 1999 after making over 1,600 road cars as well as 80 track cars. Around 3/4 had been made with windscreen, showing the public hadn't warmed to the wind deflector idea. Maybe it was the psychological safety feeling of having something between you and the car in front of you. Maybe it was the prospect of getting a bee in the face.
And we produced over 1,700 cars. So, there were a few on the road, and the spirit was there. And I think it helped to create excitement within the company, and that, we can do it, and that really is part of the spirit that remained and the influence that we had over the years.
The Spider had done its job, and it had shown that a car, admittedly a simple car, could go from concept to final product in a relatively short time, even in the modern era of crash safety testing. Patrick Lequesmont left Renault in 2009. He had just one regret.
We didn't win the battle of relaunching Alpine. And I have to say that, I spent 22 years with Renault, and when I left, the very last day that I went to Renault, I made a comment about the fact that I had one thing which I felt that I had failed, that despite all the efforts, we never actually managed to come out with an Alpine.
There would be a coda to the tale of the Spider. Renault worked on an update sometime between 2011 and 2014. Early prototypes had a bit of the original Laguna about them, but the team would eventually go for an open-top and covered version of something resembling the Renault Sport Spider with a beautiful look to it. In a twist of fate, it was not to be, because Renault management were having second thoughts about the Alpine brand. So while the original Renault Sport Spider appeared while the Alpine brand was ending, the new Spider wouldn't be produced because Renault were seeking a way of relaunching Alpine. It would start with the A110 concept in 2012, something that had similarities with the new Spider concept, especially around the back, and a slew of prototypes in 2015 and 2016. It would result in the A110 in 2017, a car Renault hoped would breathe new life into the historic Alpine name. So far, sales have outstripped the limited run Spider, but with Renault spending big to publicise Alpine, these figures may not be enough. To Renault, the Spider was a success that invigorated their styling design department to make successful cars like the Megane and the Scenic that brought the company back to financial success. The Spider also helped both the press and, by extension, the public to take another look at the new Renault and test drive a Clio, Twingo or an Espace. The few who bought the Spider understood what Renault was shooting for. Sports cars today and concept cars keep chasing the bragging rights of a faster and faster 0 to 60 time at a time when more and more of us spend time stuck in traffic jams. And what's the difference between getting to 60 miles an hour in 3 seconds or 4 seconds? The Renault Sport Spider was fast, but that wasn't really the point. It was the delight of design, the joy of driving, or even just seeing a car on the road that was unique and different. A car to make people dream. As Christian Conzon would say, it combined passion and reason, sport, escape and freedom. Patrick has a great new book out, Lucky Man over here, which talks about his early life but also goes into his time designing at Simca, Ford and Volkswagen. It also has some stunning photos of the designs he's helped to craft, including the Ford Sierra, Capri 2, cargo truck and the Volkswagen Golf 3. If you're interested in getting a copy for yourself, there's a link in the description. There's also a link on the right to my full interview with Patrick. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.